Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this video today I'm going to teach you how to create a face cast on yourself. Now my title might be a little bit misleading. There is a lot of safety precautions when it comes to creating a face cast, and especially if you wish to do it on yourself. The number one rule for me would be to have at least 2 spectators to supervise you to make sure that you are safe in doing this. I had Justin and my sister just to make sure that everything ran smoothly. Preferably it would be great if you had one person that is familiar with the process and then another person just in case of an emergency. So I can't stress that enough. Please be safe when creating face casts. You're not messing around with something simple here, like you are covering your airways, your eyes, and pretty much your nose as well. So I really wanted to put that out there because I know there are a lot of unsafe methods on the internet on how to create a face cast, which is why in this video today I have decided to show you hopefully what is the safest way possible to do on yourself. So this is my first time ever creating a face cast, so I pretty much winged it the whole video, but I did do my research and try to find out the most information that I could to pass on to you guys. So I did my first face cast and I didn't extend my forehead enough, so it was little. And then I was like, oh, so I'll extend my forehead heaps, and now I have a Megamind face cast. I actually quite like this face cast. Even though this is super big, I like that I have my complete chin area and a massive forehead space. So clearly my forehead isn't that big, but I like it because I can sculpt my prosthetics on there and create some really cool stuff. So I think that just gives me the leniency to do so. It was my first go, so I'm not too disappointed. I really like the little one because it's very detailed, and the big one will be for just like really big pieces and prosthetics, and especially forehead pieces for sure. So these are the 2 face casts that I got today, and if you'd like to learn how to make them, then please keep on watching. For my second episode in my GORE guide series, today I'm teaching you how to create a face cast on yourself at home. The first thing I did today was apply a bald cap. Now if you don't have one, you could also use a swimming cap or even some cling wrap and just adhere it down to the border of your hair just to make sure that you're nice and protected. It's also quite important so we can extend our face cast today, and also if you can, try to include your ears. Now I'm going to start adhering that down to my skin using liquid latex, just on a stippling sponge, applying that around the perimeter of my face, also bringing that down onto the sides of my neck just to make sure we can stick it down and really protect our hairline and ears. Once I've got that down, I'm going to start cutting off any excess that we have at the back. You may need to get someone to help you with this step, but I've kind of gotten used to it because I always work alone. I then just went ahead and tightened it with a bobby pin as well. Using that excess piece, I'm going to stick that down onto the side of my face just to really ensure that my ears are nice and safe. Then I'm going to take more of that liquid latex on my stippling sponge and start to blend that around the edges in thin layers to make sure that everything blends out seamlessly. It's very important that you don't have any harsh lines today because that will get picked up and that transfers onto your face cast in the finished result. To protect my brows and my eyelashes, I'm applying a thick layer of Vaseline or petroleum jelly just to make sure that none of the products that we used today stick to them. I then took a brow pencil and started to map out how big I wanted my face cast to be. You need to give about an inch leniency with your mold. So my mold was going to be this big and my face cast was going to be an inch smaller, which is how I made my first mistake. As you can see here, this is my mold. The red line is where I thought, because it lined up with my chin, that I'd be able to put my plaster, but in reality it was only able to go to where the green line was. So it's better to have a bigger mold by at least an inch, and that way you have leniency. My plaster was almost spilling out when I filled this up. Because I made the mold the size of the actual face cast that I wanted as my finished result, this is how I ended up with a smaller baby face cast. So one of my biggest pro tips in this video today is to make sure you have an extra inch leniency when making the mold on your face. To start making a face cast, the first thing you need is obviously a product that can form to your face and give you a perfect detailed impression. I'm going to be using alginate today. Alginate is a safe modeling material often used in life casting and at the dentist. So for all of my friends out there who have had braces, you will know what it's like when you go to the dentist and they take a perfect impression of your teeth using that weird putty stuff, and it's set super quick but it tastes really bad, and that's what this is. It's used in special effects makeup as well, so you can also get perfect detailed impressions of body parts, i.e. your face, your hands and your feet, things like that. There are many different types of alginate. The one that I purchased was from eBay and it was a dental one. So as you can see here, it starts out as a dark purple, goes to a light purple, pink, pale pink and then white. Once it gets to that pale pink to white stage, it's time to use. It only had a 3-minute setting time from the minute that I started mixing it, so you have to work quite quickly with this product. This is a perfect consistency and within a minute it turns to this, a rubbery gross texture that is completely set. so you do need to work in small batches to avoid any waste. To create the perfect impressionable face cast, I used about 5 to 6 small batches. Now there is no way that you can't have wastage with this product. Working in small batches will just definitely reduce it. I still threw out at least half of the product that I was mixing up every single time. So I'm starting out my face cast and I'm working from the top down. As you can see here, 2 seconds ago this product was absolute water, and then now it's completely thick and gluggy. It's a very bizarre product to work with, and I was really amazed at it when I was using it. So I just went around the whole entire border of my face and started to mix up the alginate and mold it down gently to my skin. It doesn't matter what the surface looks like, it's most important that you get it flat to your skin and get it in every crevice to get every detail. Now working around your nose, of course, you need to take extreme caution. I used my hands to apply the alginate because the popsicle stick wasn't going to cut it. Really ensure that alginate is flat down to the skin and gets in every little crevice. If there's any gaps or air bubbles between your skin and the product, it's going to give you an inaccurate face cast. It's going to have holes and weird bumps and lumps that you don't usually have on your skin when you create your face cast, and it could really mess everything up. At this point, I was being supervised by my sister and my fiance because this is when it does get quite dangerous, when you start covering your eye, your nose and your mouth area. When I was doing my eye, you really need to make sure that you have Vaseline on your eyelashes and then apply the alginate with your lid closed in a downward motion just to make sure it doesn't flip back up and get in your eye. Once you've got the alginate completely set, it's now time to move on to the plaster bandage process. Lightly dipping the plaster bandage in some water and then using your fingers to gently squeeze it and run down the bandage. That's going to smooth it out and give it a creamy consistency. You do need to remove any excess water that is on the bandage. If you oversaturate the bandages, you'll have too much water runoff, and that can also become quite dangerous when you are applying it, and it could run down into your nose and cause big problems. In order for this to become a mold, it has to have some sort of an outer edge that's going to keep its form. I'm applying a plaster bandage shell, starting from the perimeter of my face and working inwards. This is going to give the alginate stability and hold everything in place so that when we put our plaster in later, it's going to keep to the same shape of my face. If you were to try to peel off the alginate as it is right now, it would just flake away and not keep shape at all. So this is what we're doing. We're working around the edges of our face first, drying the layers in between, and then slowly working towards the middle of the face. Being extra cautious around my nose, I created a little bow tie with my plaster bandage and then gently massaged that down into my lips. I then just went ahead and continued to massage the plaster into my whole entire face, working in sections at a time, making sure that I'm draining off any excess water and really just blending that down into the skin until I got a nice, smooth and even surface. I picked up my plaster bandage roll from my local craft store, and they're usually quite cheap. They're about $5 or $6 for a whole roll. I only used about 3/4 of mine, so I was quite impressed with how far the product went. I did 3 full layers on my face and really built it up just to get a nice harder outer shell. If you do this too flimsy and you only do 1 layer, you're going to remove this from your face. It might stay together if you're lucky, but then when you pour your plaster in to create your actual face cast, it's going to move around and not be sturdy enough to hold the shape of your real face, and things could get quite distorted. Now, I did have this on my face for about an hour and a half. The plaster took a very long time to dry. You don't want yourself or your model to become claustrophobic. This can be quite a confronting and scary process, so really make sure that you try to get this off as quick as you can and don't do too many layers of plaster. I wouldn't recommend doing any more than 3 or 4 because that's all you're really going to need. I started to use my plaster quite dry with almost no water, and then of course used a hairdryer to really finish this off. Ensure that your plaster is 100% dry and firm before you attempt removing it, otherwise you could risk damaging and squashing the mold, and that could completely ruin the whole entire finished outcome. Now it is removal time, which is quite easy. I ran my fingers along the base of my neck and that just popped a little bit of air underneath the alginate and the mask. I also wanted to release my nose and my mouth first, so I took a deep breath through my nose and gently puffed that out. I started to wiggle my jaw around and frown my face, and this gently removed all of the alginate from my skin. Once I had the majority of it off, I then just undid the back of my bold cap, gently pulled that all forward, and then the whole thing came off in one big piece. It was such a relief because I was kind of worried about the removal, but everything worked out completely fine, and I ended up having all of my eyebrows and eyelashes, which was a great accomplishment. Now, it was about 3 in the morning when I finished this, so I was super happy to get it off of my face, but also very relieved to see how detailed it turned out, so for a first attempt I was very happy. Now, as you can see, there are a few cracks in the mold, and that was because the alginate batches that I made didn't completely match up and there was some air bubbles under the skin. So it is very important that you make sure everything is nice and smooth and really blends well together. Now that the mold is off your face, you can finally go ahead and patch up the other eye and nose area to make sure none of the new plaster seeps through. Once you've done that, I went ahead with a new batch of alginate and casted my other eye. I cut it out quite rough in a really torn circle so the edges were quite diffused. I then popped that on and made another batch of alginate and started to fill in all the gaps and correct all of my errors where my alginate previously didn't match up. And if you think liquid latex ruins your brushes, you haven't seen anything until you put alginate on a brush. I highly recommend that you do not do this because I did have to throw this out. Even though it was a paintbrush, I was still quite sad to see it go because I use them for my special effects all the time. Once your mold is finally complete, you can now move on to the casting period. I'm going to take some Vaseline and apply this all on the inside of my alginate. This is going to act as a release agent to make sure that the plaster doesn't stick to the mold and that we can remove it with ease later on. Once you've got a medium to thin layer of that swiped on the whole entire inside of the mold, it's then time to move on to your plaster process. I always recommend applying liquid in the bowl first and then mixing up your plaster as it says per the recipe on the packet. And if I can give you any sort of a tip with your plaster, make sure that you sift the plaster on top of the water and let it sit for a few minutes. And if you get a nice dry and cracked surface, it means you have a great ratio. My plaster was a tiny bit too thick for my liking. I let it sit on the bench for a little bit too long. I still popped it in my mold anyways, and to prevent any air bubbles, I started to swipe that into all of the corners and details with my hands. I then went ahead with the rest of the mix and poured it on top like normal, and then started to tap it on the bench a little bit to hopefully get any air bubbles that were left over to rise to the top. Now, a very important tip that I can give you all at home is to please make sure you don't tip any plaster down your drains. Make sure you rinse it in a bucket of water and then just tip it outside, otherwise you could really do some damage. Once your face cast has completely set on the inside of the mold, it is time to remove it. It's quite simple, just gently release the suction by running your fingers around the edges of the mold just to get a little bit of air under there. Then you can turn it upside down, and if you've applied the correct amount of Vaseline, it should just pop out quite easy. As you guys can see, my mold is completely intact after the casting process. If you patch this up, you could easily use it again, which I thought was pretty cool. It's not going to last forever. It did start to shrink and grow mold after a few days, but you could definitely create at least 2 or 3 casts out of this. Moving on to the correctional work, this is always best done as soon as your cast has been taken out of the mold. I'm just using a variety of sculpting tools that I got from my local dollar store and also some sandpaper as well. Mainly just focusing on light little details, trying to make them look a little bit neater and better, and also smoothing out all of those air bubbles on the surface of the skin. To be honest, I found this process probably the coolest part, to be able to see myself as another person, to play around with my features, to add in little extra details on my lips and things like that was super cool, and I really did love this whole experience. Even though this was quite rushed and very experimental, my first project and my first ever face cast for me personally wasn't a fail, so I was very happy with it. Now, I easily could have made another one of these out of the mold that I already had, but I decided to off camera repeat all of the same process and all of the same steps that I showed you guys to get a bigger face cast. So as you can see here, on every angle I have extended this very far. I'm just going to repeat the whole process again, applying plaster, Vaseline, the whole lot, releasing it, letting it sit overnight, all that jazz. The only problem is that I made this one just a tad too big. There was nothing wrong with the mold, I just went a little bit ham with the amount of plaster that I poured in there. So once I removed it, I realized that it was slightly large. I could have shaved it down, but to be honest, I'm super excited to have a massive face cast. It's not the most detailed, but it's definitely a lot bigger than the other one that I have. So I think that I can create some really cool, really large prosthetics with this piece. After repeating the same steps on both face casts, this one did lose a lot of the details. I'm not too sure why, but then again, I'm not too stressed about it either. Now to finish these off, I'm just going to seal them in place. You can use a few layers of wood glue, but I ended up using water-based varnish. If you were to use oil-based varnish, it would break down the plaster. So make sure that if you do get a clear varnish, that it is not going to turn yellow and that it is also water-based. I stippled a thick layer of the varnish all over both of my face casts and then used a brush to spread it out and make sure that it didn't fall and gather in any areas, because the last thing I wanted was clumps of the glue. I applied about 7 layers of this on both of them just to make sure that they were sealed in place. I then let them sit overnight and dry, and here is the finished product. That's it guys, that is the end of my video. I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial today. If you did, please give it a very big thumbs up. If you learned something new or if you found it helpful at all, I hope that you can create an awesome face cast on yourself. Make sure that it is safe, make sure that you are supervised, and follow all of my steps. Please do not put raw plaster on your face. Please just follow the steps, get the alginate, and it'll work perfectly for you, I promise. So I hope that you guys did enjoy. Please don't forget to subscribe for weekly body paint and special effects videos, Gore guide videos, possibly something very exciting in the next 2 weeks. Also, if you recreate any of my work, please tag me on Instagram. I'd absolutely love to see it. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.